Welcome to Around the Empire, the show that takes you around the U.S. Empire. I'm your host, Dan Wright.
And I'm your host, Joanne Leon.
And on today's show, November 24th, 2017, we speak with Joe Lauria. Joe is an American journalist based in the Middle East, author of How I Lost by Hillary Clinton, and has been a UN correspondent for 25 years. He now writes for Consortium News and has previously written for the Boston Globe and Wall Street Journal. Today we talk to him about a censored article from the Huffington Post where he offered a factual timeline about the events surrounding what's been known as Russiagate, or perceived Russia meddling in U.S. elections. Here is that interview.
Well, today we're talking with Joe Lauria about an article he published in the Huffington Post on the origins of Russiagate. And within 24 hours, the Huffington Post removed that article with no real explanation. We'll also talk about the broader issue of the growing censorship in the Western media, especially on the subject of Russia. I should mention that Joe's in Cairo right now, and while it's not the topic of this interview, there was a really bad terror attack on a mosque in the Sinai region. So welcome to Around the Empire, Joe. We're so glad to have you.
How's it going, Joe?
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So we read Ray McGovern's article where he published the PDF of the article, so we've actually seen the article. Did the Huffington Post ever get back to you as to why they took it down? Did they give you any reasonable explanation?
No explanation whatsoever. They never spoke to me beforehand. They just retracted it, and then they ignored my email asking why. They did issue a statement to a reporter at BuzzFeed who apparently saw Ray McGovern's blog as well, because Ray was the one who publicized this. He had over 6,000 views on his blog entry about this. And the Huffington Post responded to the BuzzFeed media reporter by saying that there were multiple factual errors in the story and misleading claims, and that they had gotten complaints from readers. And that's why they pulled it. So I asked the BuzzFeed reporter, his name is Stephen Perlberg, media reporter, whether he had followed that up and asked the Huffington Post what exactly these errors and misleading claims were, and that he should get in touch with me if he was going to write about it to get my side of the story. Never heard from him, totally ignored me. He accepted the Huffington Post statement, carte blanche, that's the end of the story. He basically acquiesced, in my view, in the censorship that I concluded this could only have been. Because if there's no editorial reasons in terms of factual errors that they could point out, and if they really did a fact-check analysis of my piece, then there would be some evidence of what they found to be wrong, and they could easily show it to me. But they haven't done that, so while I don't like this word, like fascism, I don't use the word censorship very often because it's overused and misused. But I can only conclude that this piece went against their faith, their quasi-religious faith in the Russiagate story. And my article forces them to think about their belief. And I think there was a visceral reaction against it, and they just canned it. Now, what is that belief based on? Is based on this January 6th, 2017 intelligence assessment, not a national intelligence estimate, which includes all 17 agencies and dissenting opinions. Not an intelligence conclusion, but an estimate or an assessment of what they think happened. And what they think happened was that Russia hacked the computers of the DNC and John Podesta, Clinton's campaign chief, with the aim of overthrowing this election for Trump. Now, there's a really interesting comment in this intelligence assessment, and I'm quoting here. It says, "Judgments are not intended to imply that we have proof that shows something to be a fact. Assessments are based on collected information, which is often incomplete or fragmentary, as well as logic, argumentation, and precedent." So my argument in the article that I wrote, first for Consortium News on October 29, and then I tried publishing it online, which I can do as a long-time contributor to the Huffington Post. I post directly online. My argument is that this January 6th assessment that you've just heard they have no proof that could show something to be fact, was based on two things paid for by the Democratic National Committee and by the Clinton campaign. The Steele memos. Christopher Steele, the former MI6 Russia desk chief of British intelligence, was hired by the Clinton campaign and the DNC. They lied about it for a year, but the Washington Post revealed that at the end of October, which is what spurred my article. The Clinton campaign admitted finally that they did pay for it, and the DNC. And Steele, who was an intelligence agent, it produced intelligence reports, but not in this case produced an intelligence report. He produced opposition research. He was working not for a government, his government, on a salary, presumably defending and protecting the British public, and which would have to have been verified by him, and then by his own agency, and other agencies probably in Britain, the way the NIE, the National Intelligence Estimate in the U.S., is vetted by 17 agencies, which did not happen on January 6th. There was only 3 agencies involved, the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA,
Right.
and they had hand-picked analysts, which means that they could have chosen whoever they wanted to give them what they wanted. So essentially, this intelligence assessment is based on opposition research in a political campaign, which is intended to throw dirt at an opponent. It's not based on the same thing an intelligence report would be based on. It's to dig up dirt and rumors and innuendo without double-checking anything else. Just throwing it all together and throw it against the wall, see what sticks against your opponent with the electorate. And for this and the CrowdStrike analysis of the DNC computers. Now, the hack took place sometime in the spring of last year, and the FBI wanted to examine the server of the DNC to see who may have hacked them, and they refused. The DNC refused the FBI, and instead they hired this firm, which is run by it's co-founded by a very anti-Putin Russian, Dmitry Alperovich, who is also a fellow at the Atlantic Council, a very anti-Russian think tank in Washington. Within a day, CrowdStrike came up with the conclusion that Russia had hacked these computers of the DNC and stole the emails. And how did CrowdStrike know this? Well, they found fingerprints. These fingerprints showed Cyrillic letters. And Russia is not the only country that uses Cyrillic letters. The name of the first Soviet intelligence chief within the metadata of this hack. And the fact is that the CrowdStrike also said that this was a sophisticated operation. Now, what sophisticated operation would leave behind such silly amateurs?
Right, exactly.
In one day, they came up with that. Now, in March of this year, Voice of America, of all outlets, did a story showing that the same software that CrowdStrike used to determine or to blame Russia for the hack of the DNC was also wrongly used to blame Russia for hacking into howitzers of the Ukrainian army on the battlefield in eastern Ukraine. And how do we know that this was false? Because the Ukrainian army denied it, not the Russians. The Ukrainian army said it never happened. And the very next day after the VOA report, that was March 23 of 2017, on March 24, CrowdStrike had to rewrite the software that they used to determine Russia had hacked the DNC. So think about it. You've got opposition research, not vetted, full of rumor, that the FBI and the CIA and the DNI all said they could not verify in testimony, yet they also said they used this information. And this CrowdStrike analysis, these are the two sources for the belief, and a religious belief, in the fact that Russia is behind the hacking of the computers and tried to throw this election to Donald Trump. Now, even if that were proven, the second thing they have to prove is that this information that they hacked actually did change voters' minds and was a determining factor in the result of this election. The rest of that January 6th session was full of old criticism of Russia Today or RT, that they wrote negative stories about Clinton. Well, they reach about 30,000 people in the United States. And Fox News reached quite a bit more, and they had a lot of negative stories about Hillary Clinton. So the idea that Russia was the reason for this is so flimsy, and this is what I wrote, and I also showed the consequences of this belief, which is to create tension, geopolitical tension between Russia and the U.S., two nuclear powers, and also creating what could only be called new McCarthyism, where anyone who, like myself, tries to question these findings, question the intelligence agencies of the United States, are branded immediately as some kind of Russian dupe, useful idiot. There have been 2 lists published that say that name websites, 200 websites, another one over 2,000 individuals who are useful idiots of Russia because these people appeared on RT. It's just extraordinary because three of the people on there were David Brock, the head of the opposition research of Clinton, Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, and CIA-friendly columnist David Ignatius of the Washington Post. These were useful idiots, according to this new list. So this is out of control. And my article tried to look dispassionately at the facts. I am not a Trump supporter. I was not a Clinton supporter. I am totally nonpartisan because I can't stand either party. I don't think either one represents my interests or the majority of Americans' interests. So I just went where the facts led. But the Huffington Post could not accept this and retracted the story.
And nobody cited any specific fact that was invalid. They just made a vague statement,
Correct.
Which is what this whole thing is based on. Broad, vague, claims and accusations, and they're just repeated over and over again until, most people I know believe that it's a done deal. They don't question that Russia hacked the DNC and, the whole campaign election influence. It's hard to find somebody who even questions it.
That's also a weird rationale for a purported news organization to say that readers were upset by a story that we couldn't find factual, that happens, that's supposed to happen. The readers don't get, the Huffington Post with that rationale is basically saying they're very, usually Democratic, certainly pro-Hillary Clinton audience is basically going to not censor any story that paints any narrative that conflicts with their worldview. Well, that's not fair enough, but that's not journalism.
No, it's censorship. That's the issue here. 121 people shared it in that 24 hours. I was able to see from the Facebook posting that the Huffington Post automatically generated. Some people liked it, but enough people, I don't know who these people are. I'd love to know. Maybe somebody from the Democratic National Committee.
Oh, I don't
know.
That's what
somebody
my question
didn't want this article appearing on that website, and it was yanked. So Ray McGovern wrote that blog piece, got a lot of views. Then Ron Paul and Daniel McAdam saw Ray's blog as well, and they invited me on their TV show, Liberty Report, did a half-an-hour in-depth discussion like we're doing here of what my article's about and what the censorship is all about. People like Tariq Ali in the UK and Max Blumenthal tweeted about it. So various people took up this cause, and I then started this petition, which I've never started a petition before, on change.org, simply saying, tell the Huffington Post to restore my censored article, either explain what was wrong with it or put it back. And I've gotten almost 1,700 signatures now, and I'm going to write this information to the editor-in-chief of the Huffington Post. I don't expect any response whatsoever. This is not something they want to be confronted with. And as you said in the introduction, as you introduced me, this is a wider issue than just my incident here. The censorship is coming furiously fast in the last few days. We've seen the head of Google saying that they would now de-rank any articles that they thought were Russian propaganda. And Facebook has said they are now going to provide early next year an opportunity for all Facebook users to see how they have followed Russian propaganda. So any article that was liked or shared, not these ads, which I think is complete ridiculous, is $100,000 in ads that some Russian organization that is not linked necessarily to the Kremlin bought $100,000 of ads, most of them after the election. In $1 billion election, the idea that this could have swayed anybody is not worth commenting on. But the Facebook will have people who use Facebook be able to determine whether you've liked a Russia Today story or a Sputnik story, and therefore you have been duped by Russian propaganda. Well, I appeared 3 times in the last week about this issue on Russia Today, on RT America and RT International, and on the Crosstalk show, which I talked about this. I am not going to stop doing that. In my opinion, RT is the Russian perspective on the news, the way the BBC is a British perspective and CNN is an American perspective on the news. And you need to watch and listen to all of them. Try to piece together a very complex international crisis that are going on to try to understand as best as you can if you're really interested, what might be happening and get as close as a possible understanding of that. And you cannot just take one point of view. I would never say anybody should just watch Russia's point of view either.
Right.
But the idea that this is propaganda, in my view, the rulers of the United States have seen in domestic policy, they witnessed a Bernie Sanders insurgency, and they witnessed Donald Trump being elected by an insurgency, even though Trump has lied and is turning his back on the people masses of desperate American workers, many of them who voted for him. They are nervous that the neoliberal policies of the last 30 years are finally being rejected. The people don't buy it anymore. They're fed up with the absolute destruction of the middle class going on, and there's anger in America, so they have to protect themselves. Now, there's anger at the American foreign wars, I believe. I don't believe they're popular as they appear to be. These are middle class and working class people are cannon fodder for these wars. They have no meaning for the average American. They have a lot of meaning for the rulers of the country. So they have to shut out criticism of their foreign policy and these domestic policies. And they do that successfully in their corporate-owned newspapers, which they're only owned by a few big corporations. So I have had many experiences with big newspapers that I've worked for where I pitched stories, and they were rejected because they would be critical of American foreign policy. Like the Defense Intelligence Agency document that was declassified. It was an August 2012 document that predicted the rise of Islamic State and said the U.S., Turkey, the Gulf Arab states were supporting the Salafists in eastern Syria, and they worried they could join with like-minded people in Iraq and create an Islamic State. Actually used those words. Totally ignored by Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, Barack Obama's president, that warning. I tried to get that piece in the Wall Street Journal twice. It was twice rejected. That's just one example. I have many others. But on domestic policy as well, they are squashing down and did not do a great job covering Bernie Sanders' followers and what they were saying and all of the great crowds that he had. They don't want to admit this. They have to squash critical stories about their rulership. So they're nervous, in my opinion. They see the population getting angry, getting rebellious. It's the oldest story in civilization. Any elite, powerful rulers, wealthy and powerful elite are going to be always trying to keep people from rebelling against them. It's happened time and time again, and one way to do that is to control information. So any negative information about themselves, they're going to try to stop. And what happens then in a case like that? I couldn't get these stories in that newspaper, so I went on RT. I talked about that DIA document there. Many other American journalists do that, and analysts. You cannot get a voice here in the U.S. where we want to say it. We don't want to say it on Russian TV. So at least we have an outlet. Russia provides that platform. Now, they have their interests too, but I believe they're defensive against the United States, aggression against them. So they are trying to undermine or bring the truth, allowing us to tell the truth about what's wrong with U.S. policy, because they are victims of it in the way they see it. And, of course, the way Russia sees things is never presented to the American public. Shut out. It's propaganda. So first they try to suppress it, and they do successfully in their own corporate-owned newspapers, and then when it comes out on Russian television, it's then labeled propaganda. It's to try to protect their interests from a rebellious population. This is what's going on right now. So you've got Google and Facebook, the two biggest, obviously, online presences I just read the other day, 57% of all online ads are bought or belong to Facebook and Google. They totally dominate the online ad space. They have total huge power online. They have been browbeaten by members of the Democratic Congress, other people in the Democratic Party. They have pressured them to crack down on this supposed Russian propaganda. So you've got now Google saying they will derank stories from Russia Today and other things they call Russian propaganda, Sputnik in particular. And you've got Facebook saying they're going to let people see how they've been influenced by Russian propaganda by clicking like on an RT story. And on top of that, they've forced RT journalists in the U.S. to register as foreign agents, which is a complete outrage. These are journalists. They may not like their point of view, but to make them register as a foreign agent is just going way beyond what we should be seeing. So we're in a very dangerous period right now, in my opinion.
Yeah. And where the funny thing is there's no outrage or discussion from the quote-unquote mainstream press who won't shut up about how much, oh, we're under threat from Trump, he insults us, we're under threat. But an actual journalistic outlet gets forced to register as a foreign agent, has its, search and traffic curtailed, whatever you think of RT, and they have nothing to say about it. They're not getting, that's the funny thing about it. They're getting insulted by Trump. Everybody's getting insulted by Trump. No one has taken any action against their maneuverings. In fact, their bosses, the people that own the corporate conglomerates, are donors to Trump or work with Trump, or now they're going to get Trump's FCC chairman to reverse net neutrality. So, the idea that, there's any real antagonism between CNN and Donald Trump outside of personnel, petty little bickering is nonsense, whereas when a real...
I agree.
It's ridiculous. So, yeah, they have nothing to say. Let me just ask you about the origin of Russiagate, because I agree with a lot of your analysis, but I do think it's strategic. It's to distract. I think it's actually a lot of what people claim Russia does with their media, which is, distract from our own problems, find a foreign scapegoat. But I do think there is a psychological aspect to this with the ruling class that is beyond strategy and cynical politics. I think Trump has caused some kind of meltdown, and they really want to believe that somehow a foreign power got 60 million Americans to vote for a guy that they find personally disgusting. Do you think there's kind of a trauma-induced delusion or something going on here beyond the cynical politics, or is it all cynical politics?
No, I think there is certainly amongst Hillary Clinton supporters, and probably herself, there's trauma and delusion. She cannot accept or understand how she possibly could have lost to that. And it's hard to understand, except if you look at her policies and look at her. She's widely mistrusted. The WikiLeaks releases, which I wrote about in a book, as you might know, called How I Lost Hillary Clinton, with a forward by Julian Assange, which is what I put into context the emails, and I analyzed them. So that may have had an effect, but she was a bad candidate, a very bad candidate. You could see that people are fed up with both parties. As I said earlier, I am. I'm not the only one. Now, they are not representing the interests of American people anymore. There's just two elite parties.
Exactly
so,
right.
Hillary Clinton was the representative of the elite, Democratic elite. And Trump was a better liar than she was. He lied to make people think that he cared about them. She didn't lie well enough to make people think she cared about them. He promised them everything, and he's delivered very little. And on domestic policy, it's been a disaster. If you look at his tax plan and health insurance plan, the one thing that he seems somehow maybe trying to continue to pursue is his policy of détente with Russia, and that is the most important and best policy he talked about during the campaign, as well as being against TPP, which he did pull out of, which you have to give him credit for. But all these, the other trade deals and the reindustrialization of America and the way he's dealt with health care and taxes, he has turned his back on people who voted for him and working-class people who put faith in him. Hillary Clinton never had any of their trust, not much at all. She lost those Rust Belt states. But Trump still is trying. It looks like after the meeting in Vietnam a week ago with Putin during a summit, he came out saying that they want to work together in Syria. And it looks like that he's still pursuing this. And this infuriates the intelligence community and the Democrats and a lot of Republicans, too, like McCain and these people, and even maybe within his own cabinet, who have seen an aggressive stance towards Russia being a keystone of their foreign policy, because first it does provide a lot of money to the military-industrial complex.
Right,
I don't
it
think
justifies it.
The whole thing. I think it's about power, about world dominance, and there's two powers that are standing in the U.S. way, and that's Russia and China. So they have to be somehow brought back to the Russians the way it was in the 1990s. During the 1990s, right after the Cold War, when Yeltsin came to power, Wall Street moved in, made alliances with oligarchs, acid stripped the whole country, impoverished Russians everywhere. I was there in 95 and saw it. And then Putin came, and he started to restore economic and political sovereignty to Russia. And this has put a stop to the exploitation of Russia by greedy powerful Americans in Wall Street and in government. And they would like to have somebody there When Medvedev was the president, they started the reset, a whole nonsense about reset. Putin came back, and he stood up to the United States to defend, in my opinion, Russia's interests. And one of those interests was to stop America from arming extremists in Syria. Defense Intelligence Agency document that I referred to warned against, and that's why Assad invited Russia in to put an end to these monstrous groups. And we know from another leaked conversation of John Kerry when he was Secretary of State at the end of 2015, it was actually at the end of 2016, outside the General Assembly in New York, he had met with some Syrian exiles, and the tape makes clear, you could hear it go online, he says that the Americans were watching ISIS move on Damascus. We were hoping we would get Assad to leave. But Putin came in and saved him. So here are the Americans supposedly fighting ISIS in Syria and bombing them, but they were allowing them to advance. He says it on the tape. And this is what Putin was fighting against. He did not want ISIS to take over in Damascus. I don't like Assad as bad as he is. ISIS is much worse than he was, and Al-Qaeda and these groups, much, much worse than a secular leader who allowed women some rights and Christians, and even Sunni businessmen liked him, even though he was an Alawite. So this is the essence of it. The Russiagate story, in my opinion, also fits into this pre-election strategy of pushing back against Putin and Putin's Russia to try to overturn his government. And they did it first in Ukraine by a coup d'etat there. And as Brzezinski said, if you want to get Russia to stop being a Eurasian power, you have to take away Ukraine from them. This was American strategy right there. The 2014 coup d'etat in Ukraine against a democratically elected, though corrupt, President Yanukovych. So I think Russiagate fits into this overall strategy. That's what I write about also in the Huffington Post piece. They weren't going to accept anything what I'm saying to you right now. You're not hearing this on mainstream media. You're not going to read this in the Huffington Post. But what my incident shows is that there is direct censorship when it's put in there. When I said I pitched stories to the Wall Street Journal, it was rejected beforehand. This was published and then removed. And I think it's a great example of what's going on right now with our media, totally enthralled to these corporate interests because they're owned by corporate interests. And Americans are in a very bad situation when it comes to information and this growing censorship. And I'm just hope that my example of what happened to me is warning somehow where we're headed in the U.S. because of this manufactured story about Russia. That's what it seems like. It comes from opposition research. And the squashing of any information that's critical of American rulers abroad and at home that happens to seep out in Russian media. Therefore, it has to be condemned as propaganda.
Well, it's interesting that 2012 DIA report was from Michael Flynn, was overseen by Michael Flynn, and released much to the dismay of John Brennan, the then CIA director. And I swear, if I had to put money down on who leaked that transcript of the Kislyak-Flynn call to David Ignatius of the Washington Post, is John Brennan is my suspect number one. But let's just leave that. Let's leave that aside for a moment. But that's a mix. There's two prongs to this. There is a foreign policy elite in the U.S. They're still the elite despite having screwed up for the last 10 years. At the Brookings Institution, the Atlantic Council, the Heritage Foundation, they're all basically underwritten by the defense industries. There's actually one now. There was one for Michelle Flournoy, who is set to be Hillary Clinton's Secretary of Defense, I think Center for American Security. That's also underwritten by defense. So there's a Democrat and Republican kind of fake, antagonism when in reality it's one kind of war party.
Certainly on foreign policy they are. Yeah.
Certainly on foreign policy, which is how they like it. And so they have an interest in tensions with Russia because Al-Qaeda can't justify the F-35. You need a real state peer competitor to justify $1.5 trillion new plane that nobody needs and doesn't even work. So that's part of the Russia thing. And then there is also this, it's a marriage made in hell because there is now this partisan psychosis, or at least myopia, of rehabilitating Bush-era figures because they're attacking Trump. And it's disgusting to watch on social media every day. And I think those two things have combined to create this horrible environment right now where we're watching Oh my God, it's terrible. So I think go ahead.
You make a good point that they're losing. Libya is a complete, utter disaster, and that was Hillary Clinton's war. Without any question, you read the last section of my book, it goes into great detail about that. The emails prove this. Iraq was a disaster, of course. Syria, they did not overthrow Assad, and so many hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. And where are they winning? Yemen? Yemen is one of the worst situations going. It's been going on for more than 2 years. This is the richest country in the Arab world against the poorest, backed by the U.S. with logistics and intelligence. It's starting to get a little bit of attention. I know 60 Minutes did a piece apparently on Sunday, but they never mentioned America's involvement in this, which is quite shocking. Is it? No. No, it's not. That's another example of suppressed news is what I'm talking about. Don't mention the American role in all of this. Keep the American people in the dark. And if somebody tries to shine some light, take down their article. If it comes from Russia, call it propaganda. Don't even examine the facts and the details. This is also very troubling. There's no real debate in the U.S. There's a very highly politicized situation from what I can see from here. But there's no real serious debate about issues. It's not a deeply politically educated country, and the media doesn't want to go into the details of the things. That's what I wrote in my piece, the details, the facts about the origins of Russiagate. And, you could debate me. You could disagree with my analysis, but not the facts. Tell me what the facts were wrong. I understand they didn't like my interpretation of the facts, of course. But tell me what is factually wrong.
Well, the facts are inconvenient.
Yeah, but the way I assembled them, especially if you disagree with me and you take it down, that's censorship. The idea is not whether you agree with my article or not, but whether you agree with my right to publish it. There was one commenter on my petition, which the best of all of them, and there were many good ones. This woman wrote that she didn't agree with my analysis at all. She thinks Russia did it. But she signed it anyway because I had the right to publish it. That's the whole issue here. Let's have a debate. But they're shutting out dissent. They're shutting out dissent. And a lot of people, and Democrats in particular, are eagerly behind this. And they don't understand the consequences of ratcheting up tension with Russia. Stephen Cohen is probably the most brilliant Russia analyst in the U.S., one of them anyway. And he's standing out there alone and taking hell as well for this.
He is.
Just saying that Russiagate of being fueled by zealots is the word he uses, the word I use, because this is like a religion. Right?
I've listened to Cohen every week pretty much since right before the coup in Ukraine. And you can just tell his level of alarm has just escalated and escalated and escalated. And, pretty much what he has said, he was saying this is a new Cold War, before anyone else was. And, in fact, Dan and I started a new section of the Shadowproof website. Before we became independent, that's where we wrote. And it was called The Next Cold War. And
it was 2 years ago.
It was 2 years ago, yeah. So
we were being dystopic. We were like, oh, it's so terrible. We're gonna have a new Cold War if this doesn't stop. That was optimistic. I didn't realize it was gonna get this nuts.
And at that time, people were saying there's no way that U.S. and Russia will ever go to war. It's just slowly escalated. And the thing is, there are a lot of people who tend to agree with us politically, but still, they're still on board with Russiagate. And they don't see the slippery slope. Like, do you really think that this is going to stop with Russiagate? We already know that it won't. Other elites who are in big trouble.
Look at who's being rehabilitated. Look at who's being rehabilitated. Bill Kristol's being rehabilitated. George W. Bush is being rehabilitated.
Now they're saying that Brexit is because of the Russians. So obviously it's already spreading.
Too, and
Oh yeah, Catalonia. So any time they're in trouble, they're like, hey, it's like there's some good word for that.
It's their Emmanuel Goldstein. It's anytime something goes wrong, anytime the stock market's down. Well, did Russia have something to do with this? So that's what's being set up.
You can already see
so ridiculous.
The slippery slope is right. It's right in front of our eyes already.
No, we're falling down it.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It's so ridiculous to us, but people believe it because it's demagogues like Rachel Maddow foaming at the mouth every night about Russia. Our ratings are sky high. she's riding a wave of great success. I mean, this is really what drives corporate journalists' careerism. This is your ticket right now. Beat on Russia. Push this story. Sells papers. Gets me a promotion. This is so despicable, this kind of behavior, that they have no allegiance at all to facts and trying to find out what the truth is. It's a joke to think that they even care about that. And we're in this situation that you're describing. And it's a slippery slope. You're absolutely right. And it's going to be too late before they wake up. And the rulers know this is nonsense.
I was going to say, and it's toxic because, CNN created this investigative unit, and they were so anxious to get out a Russia story that they goofed and had to retract one. It was about that guy Scaramucci, who was like the communications.
Well, there have been many of those.
Right, they had to keep retracting.
Yeah, the ones in Russia. The Russians had hacked this Vermont power station.
Yeah, the Washington
Post.
Then
they had to retract that. Then there was this great story by Jason Leopold in BuzzFeed the other day, saying that he discovered money was being shipped from the Russian Foreign Ministry to embassies in the United States for the 2016 elections. Turns out there were elections for the Duma, and Russians in the United States couldn't vote by going to their consulates. So they need money for that. The absurd story. The correction and it comes.
Nobody reads the correction. Yeah,
that's it.
And Jason Leopold is he's a smart journalist, and he knew. I just believe he knew that. He knew that all along.
I don't know. I have a history with Jason Leopold. You can read an article I wrote in Outlook Washington Post about 10 years ago. He appeared to have impersonated me with Karl Rove spokesman during the indictment of supposedly of Karl Rove over the Broward Times story. You go to I'll send you the link. You can put it on your website. You can see what Jason Leopold did, what appears to have done by saying he was me. So I have a long problem with Leopold, and he's also now published this crap story and this also ridiculous puff piece about one of the guys who works at CrowdStrike to try to show that this was up and up, and everyone that's half a brain knows the CrowdStrike analysis was rubbish.
Yeah, CrowdStrike
Voice of America is the one who really exposed him.
Yeah, over Ukraine. I forgot about that.
We did for our listeners who may have missed this, we did an episode with Jeffrey Carr about, the attribution, all the problems with the attribution to the Russians, and that's definitely worth listening to.
But I think the lesson from this is just to push it here, because I know we're short on time, is just I think we've entered this late stage of Russiagate hysteria where now you can't even, before it was to just smash anyone who said it was wrong. Now it is a kind of disappearing act where that kind of criticism is now supposed to be relegated to like conspiracy websites and only whack jobs believe this. And my honest view, at least, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, is if the Huffington Post had seen it before it went into their system, they would have suppressed it then. They were going to suppress it no matter how they could suppress it, which just shows you these people are out there suppressing legitimate news stories. That's how much, all in the name of stopping authoritarianism.
Yeah, it is bizarre.
Yes, but it can't happen in America. We're a democratic country. We are the greatest country in the world. We're spreading democracy. I mean, too many people believe that. Media people believe that, and that's the way they write these stories. So we don't really know what the real American foreign interests are in their military operations, in their intelligence operations, in their coups and whatnot, which we've seen so many of since Second World War ended. What has the U.S. leadership have done? Did they spread progress in the world, or are they just enriching themselves and making themselves more powerful with local actors they're in alliance with? That's what we've seen from Latin America to Eastern Europe, everywhere now, and Africa as well. So, and in Asia. So we don't have a population that is getting the real, getting a different perspective at least. This is what's most troubling. They are shutting out a perspective that calls into question what they're doing, foreign and domestic, the leaders of the country, and that is, yes, kind of totalitarian or even dictatorial suppression of news. And it is happening in the U.S. now as we speak, and they've got Google and Facebook, the two biggest online presences, to do their bidding for them And it's a corporate government alliance that runs the U.S., and they've got their corporations suppressed. Now, governments cannot stop a newspaper from publishing with prior restraint. They can't stop a public newspaper from publishing something and be learned from depending on paper paste. But corporations can. The Constitution is about government cannot stop free speech. Government cannot stop an article from being published.
That's a great point.
Corporations can. They can.
Right.
And they are. They're
That's
doing
a great
it for government
point.
and for each other.
Implementing
That's why
prior
they went over there
restraint.
to get...
Implementing prior restraint via the corporations.
Yes, as you saw, Warner, was a Senator Warner, flew all the way to California to tell Facebook to get it done.
Yeah, Facebook had come back.
They were
and said,
reluctant at first.
They came back and said we didn't find anything, and then Mark Warner was on a jet.
Yes.
The next day. I don't know exactly how long.
So that's government telling corporations to do what the government can't do, which is suppress news.
But we also had Eric Schmidt, who was, colluding, if you will, with the Hillary Clinton campaign. The emails showed that, right?
Yes.
So I don't know how much they had to push Google, but it looks like they did have to push Facebook.
Yeah, this is to make sure. Right.
We had New York Times reporting.
Glenn Thrush.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, see, I think the whole point for this is now to set up the next time. They got Trump. They didn't want Trump, but now they're going to set up a censorship regime so this can't ever happen again.
That's right.
Well, they don't want it to happen again. He's screwing things up for them in Russia, but not in other ways. You're right. But my feeling is he's so dysfunctional that he's going to be more of a chance of him screwing up the GOP's agenda than Pence would. So I'm not a big fan of impeachment, but I think Pence would be worse.
Oh, definitely.
Because he's more efficient and he has better relations with Congress since he was there. He can get things done. And Trump's having a hard time getting things done, which is good as far as I'm concerned.
All right. So, where can people find your work, Joe? Where should people look for you online?
I'm published on ConsortiumNews.com, and for about 23 hours or so, you can see my articles on Huffington Post. But I only put my stuff on the Huffington Post because I want it to bring to a mainstream to see what happens when you try. So the Consortium News is really the best source of my articles right now.
Okay, great. Well, everybody check out Joe's work on Consortium News. Joe, so thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
It was great. Come back soon and talk to us again, Joe.
I will do. No problem.
Thanks.
All right.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And that's our show. I want to thank you for listening, and a special thank you to Joe Lauria. You can find Joe on Twitter @UNJoe. You can see his work at Consortium News. We're independent media. We rely on your contributions. We'd really appreciate it if you want to make any contributions. Go to patreon.com/aroundtheempire or other donation options. Please visit our website, aroundtheempire.com. Questions, concerns, want to yell at me? Dan@aroundtheempire.com. You can also follow us on Twitter @aroundtheempire and see us on Facebook. Have a good one.
Take care, everyone.